Hi there, legal writers. Welcome to this Legal Grammar Redux video series with me, Jill Barton from the University of Miami School of Law. In this video series, I'm covering 12 grammar topics, which are covered in more depth in chapters 19 through 21 in the handbook for the new legal writer. And those topics include 8 grammar basics and 4 more advanced grammar principles. And in this video, I am discussing quotations. Like the other advanced grammar principles, you've certainly encountered a quotation before. You've probably quoted a source, but now that you are a legal writer, you need to take extra care to make sure everything that you are quoting is quoted with great care. We'll discuss 4 rules to make sure that you are quoting with care. The first is something you've seen before. You'll use double quotation marks to indicate a quotation and single quotation marks to indicate a quote within a quote. So here we have a sentence from Justice Barrett, and she's writing about what the majority is saying in a previous opinion. We concluded, she says, that the special master's clear and convincing evidence standard for the threshold question of redressability was too strict. So she's quoting the special master, who was also quoted in a previous opinion. So it's a quote within a quote. And that's why you see 3 hash marks around that word threshold, that single quotation mark and the double quotation mark. That indicates that she is quoting the special master who was quoted in a previous opinion. She quotes another short phrase from that majority opinion, too strict, which is highlighted here. And you can see that that just has the double quotation marks because she is making a direct quote from the majority opinion and not a quote within a quote. If you're ever quoting something that's a quote within a quote within a quote, you'll just alternate double quotation marks, single quotation marks, and then double quotation marks inside that. The next rule is where to place punctuation when you are quoting. This first part of the rule is very easy. When you have small punctuation marks, like commas and periods, so if you think about a small punctuation mark, it's just one little mark, it's always going to go inside the quotation mark, no matter what. That's because it's small and it always fits inside. For larger punctuation marks, like an exclamation mark, a quotation mark, a colon, a semicolon, these are punctuation marks with 2 marks in them, and they will go in the original quote inside that quote mark only if part of the original quote. So here we see an example from a Supreme Court opinion where both the comma and the period go inside the quotation, and it should never be any other way. Now, with those larger punctuation marks, question marks, exclamation marks, semicolons, and colons, you will see them both inside and outside the quotation mark. And that's because where they are placed depends on what the original source had. So here we have a question posed by Justice Gorsuch in an opinion, and he's asking, why bother with a trial if the finality of any judgment rendered by a court will be dubious? It's his question. He's adding that quotation mark. He's using a quote from an earlier opinion, and the question mark goes outside that quotation mark. In this next example, the question mark is inside the quote because it is part of the original passage that is being quoted. So it's with this third rule about quotations where things get a little tricky. And with this rule, we'll discuss how we will use a bracket or an ellipsis to show that we've made any change at all to a quotation. In this first example, we are just changing the case of a letter from lowercase to uppercase. We have an uppercase T in the quote, and that tells us 2 things. First, that in the original, to was written as a lowercase word. Secondly, it tells us that to was not the start of the sentence in the original because, of course, we start all sentences with capital letters. So for that reason, we also don't use an ellipsis at the start of a sentence. We only use brackets. We will use brackets for 2 other reasons. One is if we want to indicate that we've changed a word. Here, Justice Kavanaugh is quoting the Fulminante case, and the original Fulminante case uses the word trial in this sentence. But for some reason, Justice Kavanaugh wanted to use the word proceeding, so he substituted that word in here, and he showed that he made that change by putting brackets around that word proceeding. You'll see very frequently that legal writers change verb tenses, and that's because we're trying to take a quotation and fit it in our writing, and maybe we're using a different verb tense in our writing. Here we have a couple examples from Justice Kagan in her dissent in a Voting Rights Act case in 2021. Here she's changing the verb tense of the word contrive and pour. And here she's added the past tense ed in brackets, indicating that she's made that change. And of course, for pouring, she's added the ing inside brackets. This tells us that pour was the verb in the original, but she is adding the ing to change that. The last part of this rule is how to use an ellipsis. So as I stated with the bracketing of that capital letter at the beginning of a sentence, we never use ellipses at the start of sentences. We only use them in the middle or at the end. And here we have an example from Justice Barrett where she has plopped in 2 sets of ellipses to show that she is taking out words. She's defining the word extension, and she's taking out some words to use just the part of the quotation that she thinks is significant. And she indicates that with 3 spaced periods to show that words have been taken out from the original that she is quoting. We will also use ellipses to show that we have made a change to the end of a quote. And here we have Justice Sotomayor taking out an entire sentence where she's quoting the testimony of the defendant that she's writing about in a dissent. She quotes this first sentence, "I'm not the same person I was when I was 15, with 4 spaced periods. That indicates that she's taking information out and she's ending her sentence. We'll see another example of that here on this next slide, where Justice Breyer is indicating that that quotation that he is taking from the original continues on past what he is sharing in his own opinion. So in this case, if you look really closely, you'll see that there is a space following the word patience, and then we have 4 spaced periods. That shows us the sentence that Justice Breyer is quoting continues on, but that he is then ending the sentence. I'm going to jump back to that example from Justice Sotomayor to show you the difference. You'll see that the period is touching that number 15, and that indicates to us that she is quoting the entire sentence. "I'm not the same person I was when I was 15, but then she's taking out part of a sentence or an entire sentence. So she's using the ellipses for that, and then starting her sentence from there. So that's a minor change. You see here, we have Justice Breyer ending his sentence before the quoted passage ends, but then he creates the end of the sentence with that 4th period. So that's why at the end of a sentence, when you're using an ellipsis, you'll see 4 spaced periods. Whether they're touching that last word or not depends on the original and how you're quoting that. The last quotation rule deals with block quotations. And this is something that should be used very rarely, especially for a new legal writer. You should use your own words rather than quoting long passages. But for quotes of 50 or more words, you should use a block quotation format and indent them on both sides. And here we have an example from a Justice Breyer opinion. He's quoting a long passage from a 1760 case, and he pulls the entire thing out and indents it on both sides as a block quotation. Again, something the new legal writer should do rarely, but you should certainly know the format if you are going to use a quote or check someone else's writing if you're looking for quotes of 50 or more words. So that's it for quotations. And I just want to end by reminding you that everyone can be a great legal writer. You're taking the right steps to get there just by watching these videos, and I hope to see you next time.